In this episode of the IT Experts podcast, we help you understand why your customer experience is even more important right now. Welcome to the IT Experts podcast, the only podcast to help MSPs scale to 1 million, and if already there, get to 5 and go faster. At the end of the day, isn't it all about building a business that works for you rather than you for it? I hope you enjoy the show. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the IT Experts podcast. Today, we are talking about customer experience and why it's important and why it's different, why it's changed, why it's evolving with Justin Neale from Innovate CX. So good morning, Justin. How you doing?
Hi, Ian. Very well. Thank you for having me on.
No problem at all. Look, we've had some great conversations getting ready for this show, all about customer experience, which is a massively important thing. We know that MSPs already are incredibly high retention with their customers, and attrition rates are very, very low compared with other businesses. But there is so much more that we can do, and we're going to expel those myths today, and we're going to help and give you some tips and tricks to make your customer experience even more amazing than you think it is already. But how we can help you become stickier with your clients, and how you then can attract more of those clients into that funnel to experience more of your customer experience. Lots of words around experience going on. But anyway, let's just crack on. Justin, for those who don't know who you are, give us a little bit of a bio. Who are you? What do you do? And who do you help?
So, my name's Justin Neale, and I spent 25 years in corporate life, most recently within Airbus Group. And I was the managing director and head of customer experience for a UK subsidiary of theirs called NavBlue. So we did all the charting and flight planning solutions. But ultimately, my customers were sort of around 800 airlines around the world. And I've always worked in that customer experience domain, looking at, how can businesses kind of optimize their processes to better serve the customers and really take the pain out of dealing with it, with those businesses. And it, as you mentioned, MSPs, sort of might have a kind of a relatively low customer attrition, but actually that's just a tiny bit of the benefits of focusing on the customer experience.
Brilliant. And what are you doing now then?
So last September, I decided to jump ship and actually just wanted to work with smaller, more nimble businesses. I love that kind of ability to working with smaller sort of companies that can actually implement change very, very quickly, which is hard to do rapidly in a larger corporate environment. And now I'm working with both MSPs, IT service providers, but also just a huge number of other, customers, Hampshire Cricket, a chain of opticians, and really looking at that customer journey they provide and actually what it can do for their business by focusing on it.
Fantastic. So in the room, we've got the MSPs. We've got them very techie, very process-led. Everything's all got to be in a box. Everything's got to be systemized with a bit of an API or a system, as it would be. In your view, where does when we talk about customer experience, it's a broad term, isn't it? Where, in your view, does it start and where does it finish in the whole, life cycle of the business for an MSP?
The way I always start with any potential customer is to look at who their ideal customer is. Who do they really want to attract, and who do they like working with? Because ultimately, everyone has customers that they really enjoy working with, and the ones that are a little bit harder for one reason or another. They might not be a good fit for your organization, or just, actually there's just a bit of a clash in terms of personalities, and your processes don't fit their business model. And so really that's the starting point, is to think, okay, well, who do I really enjoy working with, and who am I set up to really serve well as a business? And then it's kind of then working back from that. So that customer persona that you create, you then work back and you think, okay, well, what's the ideal journey for that customer? And what comes out of that is you end up kind of really simplifying your business. You strip out anything that doesn't match that customer persona. And, what that means for your staff, if you have them, is that they're happier, more engaged, because actually you've got, processes that just work really, really well. You take all that waste out of your organization in terms of processes that don't add value to the customer, and they probably then don't add value internally. And you end up with better staff engagement and much, much happier customers. But that isn't really where most businesses are, because nearly every business starts from a very diverse customer base, because when you start out, you want revenue. And so you take on every potential customer. You can, because that's what you need and in the early days. But that means you're trying to serve many different personas, and your customer journey can be a bit lumpy and not something that's that smooth.
So this is now taking the whole idea and concept, and I know I can feel the MSPs on this podcast now starting to quiver and quake as I mention the N word, the niche word, getting into a particular target market. So we always talk about niche as in a marketing, and to attract somebody, to get to help them understand that you get them, you understand their business, what they need to do. And as a marketing activity, you could put out a blog for solicitors, lawyers, and all different types of people to attract them into your business. So what you're saying then is it doesn't stop when you close them into the business, does it? You're saying that customer experience, now what you've just promised them as part of your niche speciality and working with lots of data, multiple sites, different people, whatever it might be, that then now needs to come into the customer service journey. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. And so once you've got that initial kind of persona of the customers you like working with and you can really serve well, it's then how do you keep them engaged? And you've all heard of buyer's remorse. You spend some money and then immediately you regret that decision. Doesn't matter if it's a car or a house, or a smaller purchase. And MSP's customers will go through that same journey. They've taken a risk. They will have looked at other providers and they'll have made a decision to go with you, but immediately they'll doubt their decision. And how do you combat that? And that's where, how do you have a journey for them that emotionally keeps them on a high? How do you want them to say, okay, great, I've made the right decision here all the way through that experience with you? So that's, really sort of, everyone loves that, kind of initial sales journey because it's exciting, it's very engaged, you're chasing, everyone loves it. But then post that sale is how do you then serve that customer well and keep them engaged? And that's a piece I spend a lot of time focusing on is how do you come across in your communications? How do you wow that customer with everything you do and bring all your staff on board in that journey as well?
Because we know that you could go to, here you go, you could go to Fortnum and Mason's and get your cup of tea, or you could go to Tesco's. Other supermarkets are available. But I know it's a product, so I've probably used a completely wrong analogy here. But what I'm getting at here is that customer service is something that people will pay more money for. If you're buying a premium car, you will be, the service I got from them was incredible. Whereas if you're buying a cheaper car, you may think I'm actually going to accept a lower level of service because I am, that's kind of not lining up with my standards. How does the MSP need to adapt themselves? Because apparently, according to MSPs, everybody does the same thing. Everybody should be charging the same price, and it's all a race to the bottom. But if you want to stand, we know that that's not true. And if we know that if you stand out and you provide amazing customer service, people will pay an extra premium for that. But how does that show up in the MSP world? What does that look like in terms of behavior?
It all comes down to understanding what your customers want. So customer success. So if I talk to, it doesn't matter what industry they're in, but if I talk to most businesses and say, how do you measure your business performance? Everyone will probably talk about revenue or margins, or maybe, EBITDA if they're a larger organization. Very few have any metric of customer success. And let's say let's say you're selling electric toothbrushes. Take that example, and you're doing well, 5-star reviews, but actually, are your customers successful with that product? And maybe you think, well, yeah, cleans their teeth fine, great. But actually, what if that customer was buying it because their old one, the charge didn't last very long? Actually, what was important to them was that it had a really good battery life, or the total cost of ownership was cheaper. It was cheaper to replace the heads. If you take a step back as an MSP and you think, okay, well, this customer has probably had an experience with a prior MSP, or they might have had a negative experience. What's important to them? And for every customer, it's going to be something a little bit different. And providing just the basics, is that's what's expected. That's the minimum that you have to do, is to provide that reliable, service on time, on cost. But actually, if you can understand what is it that's really important to them, and as solicitors will have different requirements to veterinary practice, and if you understand really what does success look like for them, that's where you can then really wow them, and that's where that customer will never leave you, and they will pay a premium for that service that they get from you as well. And if you have other services that you can recommend because you know that it's actually going to help their business because you really understand what they want, they will buy them. And that's really, that's that cost of living crisis. Every business is choosing where to spend its money more carefully, but they will pay more if they're getting the value.
When you link that into an account management process as well of, what products and services, new products and services have you got up that's going to help, obviously you increase your revenue and your profit. But then if you then lie that back into your, your customer service matrix map, whatever that looks like, and then starts to layer on what they need and get into those conversations, then that makes that, a much better process. So this process then really does involve all of the, it doesn't just stop at sales, it goes all the way through, the technicians. I suppose what just when you were just talking then, it was quite interesting. I was sort of thinking about, buyer's remorse from the buyer's side, but also, you could have your help desk or your projects team or your onboarding team, however you're doing it, and they might think, oh God, we've just got another customer coming here right now. And you must see that how do people keep their teams motivated when, a lot of the time we hear a lot of our MSP owners in the Growth Hub are going out there and they're on cloud nine and they're selling, and they're having a whale of a time. And sometimes they come on the calls with us and they go, my God, if I sell one more thing, my team are just going to go, like, they're going to hit the roof because they've just got to deal with it. How can we help the MSP business owners to connect, engage, and build some excitement to their teams so that they don't just think it's a bit of buyer's remorse? Oh my God, he's been out selling some more stuff.
So that customer journey mapping, often I run it as a workshop with clients, and it's really working with all of your team to say, well, who is that ideal customer? Because if you just do it top down, you tell them, this is who we're going after, and this is how you're going to do your job and how you're going to serve the customer. They'll take some of it on board, but they're not going to be that engaged. But actually, if you explain the kind of the vision, you go through that persona creation, and everyone agrees, yeah, that's the customers we love working with. And then you put yourself in their shoes, that client, you're in their shoes and you're imagining what they want. The team usually gets super creative about what could they do differently. Let's say even if it's something simple like a server build, you're kitting out a rack, and you really sort of think, well, actually that's something usually behind the scenes, a technician who never gets to see the clients doing it. But actually, they're going to take real pride in their work if they're going to take a video and send a little update to the client saying, almost got your rack wired up, super, super pleased with how it's, been done. A really rough and ready 1-minute video that they email to the client. Client, thinks that's brilliant. They've got an update and they can see that the technician's doing an amazing job. Compare that with an MSP I was chatting to the other day who's just won a client, but that client, good number of end users, is going to help expand their business and their revenue. But that client is now demanding out of hours support, which is something they don't offer.
Oh, that contentious issue.
Yeah. And they're probably not going to win many more customers like that. So they're now in a situation where, yes, they've won that business. They're now having to get their team to agree to do out of hours support, having increased costs in the business, increased complexity. That customer is a terrible fit for their organization. And you can imagine how the team are now feeling as a result
Yeah.
of that.
Yeah.
And that's why, if you bring your team on board and you all agree of the right fit of customers for your business and you really stick to it, you get much more respect from your team as a business owner because you're protecting them, and everything just works because you're not then throwing a kind of a customer that doesn't fit into the organization. And the nice thing is you don't have to have one persona customer. You could have your solicitors and you can serve them really well, and you can say, oh, great, we've nailed that experience for the solicitors. Now we can go out and we can say, actually, that veterinary practice or the construction industry, that's our next one, because we know that we can actually now perfect a journey that really wows them.
That's brilliant. And segueing quite nicely, as if this wasn't actually planned, into customer service mapping. So what you're saying here is that we could have different maps for logistics companies, hotels, holiday parks, whatever it might be. What's the concept and the benefit of spending time mapping out the customer service journey? What does that entail, or what should it entail in your view?
Something I come back to is kind of this principle of, kind of lean. So lean is a manufacturing term, and it really is just about making sure that you only have in your business things that add value, and it's adding value to you. So it's processes you have to have, but it's also about delivering value to the client. So you basically go through end to end and you say, okay, why do we do this? And often processes just stack and layer over time because, as businesses evolve, you add more tools and processes and customers with different needs. And when you do that customer journey mapping exercise, you go back through and you look at it from the client's perspective. You say, well, why are we, getting them to fill out a paper form? It's something which you've just done and you just accept. But actually, that's a pain point for the client. So actually, you move it online with an e-signature, and then you just gradually work end to end through everything, and that becomes your kind of core set of processes, that core journey that you have for a client. And actually, that life cycle is kind of end to end from the pre-sales all the way through to the customer loyalty and advocacy at the end. But within it, you've got dozens of different journeys. A customer might phone up and add, request a new user. That's a journey in itself. So you break down that end to end life cycle into a series of journeys, and you then just work through each one, continuously improving it. And every year, your service just gets that little bit better. And it's fun too. It's really engaging. You bring all the staff on board. But it also means your core processes then it's like your foundations of a house. You know, if you've got really manual, really poor foundations, you can't really build much on top of it. Once you get that core platform in place, you can build as high as you like and add as many different customer personas. And then all you're doing really is topping and tailing to say, okay, we just need to communicate a little bit differently to a construction customer versus a solicitor. But actually, the whole process works perfectly end to end for all of those clients.
And would you recommend within your technical team or within your MSP, you would have somebody who is measuring and monitoring customer service, or would you have it like as a departmental thing so that everybody can contribute and make suggestions and improvements to the customer service experience?
I think when you get a real customer centric culture in place in your organization, everyone contributes
Right. Okay.
because everyone should be challenging themselves to say, oh, how can we make that easier? And generally, it means it's lower cost for your organization too. You end up ditching a whole load of tools that you don't need. You strip out processes, people are more engaged, and your time to market's quicker. So you'll implement customers quicker, you can serve them faster. There's a lot of benefits.
And just flicking onto the measurement thing, a lot of people, a lot of MSPs use, the traffic light system at the bottom of their emails. Just hit a button, how do we do red, amber, green, blah blah blah. Sometimes, the only depth of the conversation we ever kind of get to hear is that, yeah, well, if they're red, then I get a task. It goes through the PSA. I get a task, and I phone them straight away. If it's amber, then we do this, and if it's green, then that's obviously all great. What can the MSP do over and above, that, because that's quite a reactive way of measuring customer service, for want of a better phrase, isn't it? What can the
Absolutely.
MSP do to be a bit more proactive about that?
Yeah, that CSAT score at the end of a ticket, it is important because that's a point of, time where the customer has a need and you've either satisfied it or you haven't.
Yeah.
But actually things like maybe every 6 months or at least every year is having that business review with your
Yeah.
customer. Sitting down and saying, okay, well, is your business still, planning to expand into another city, for example? So understanding, their business goals, helps you to also understand there might be great opportunities for you to provide more services. I see so many times that businesses end up losing out on new business from a client because the client isn't aware of all the services they can offer, and that provider isn't aware of what that business is seeking to do. And if you sit down and have that business review with them, so you go through and have, there's great templates for this where you can sort of basically say, here are all the services you take from us. This is, what you told us before about your business direction. Is that still accurate? Are these still the right points of contact in your business? Is anything changing? And then you can go through and say, well, you're using all of these services from us. You're not really using this one. Maybe you don't need it anymore. That brings great trust and credibility to say, actually, we're going to save you some money, but maybe you could benefit from this instead. And those, at least, some business, if you've got large clients, do that on a quarterly basis, just a bit of a check-in, a very light kind of version of it. At least once a year, have that more in-depth kind of review with that client.
And that's the bit where, again, that account management is, I think it's very easy for us to say there's these different processes to make us an MSP successful. And I think this, what we're talking about today, is kind of knitting together the marketing process, the onboarding process, the account management process, the customer service, because customer service is a thing, not a what, isn't it? It's the way that you do things and the way that you culturally, engage with that. In your opinion, Justin, how do MSPs make sure that all of their team are on the same hymn sheet when it comes to customer service? We've got the process, we've got the map, we know how we're kind of like measuring it. But what are some of the things that you've seen work past where they can use it as an employee engagement point of view or a team building point of view or things like that, just to get a double check to make sure that everyone's using the right language, everybody's looking for opportunities to, provide more services? What does that sometimes look like?
Well, I mentioned that example of the technician taking a short video building out a rack for a customer. So everyone in a business serves the end customer in one way or another. They could be part of the accounting team, they could be, a technician, they could be someone on the support desk. They all have a role to play, but often not all of those people are end customer facing, but actually they all have a role to play. And, I think that's where it's really, really important. Let's say you're onboarding a new customer. So you've got, a sales team. If you're, a large enough organization to have a dedicated sales team, then typically you're going to be handed over to maybe a team that's going to be responsible for the implementation, and then the customer support and ongoing kind of work. For a customer, quite often those handoffs between those teams are really jarring. There's a great example, the getting married to bride and groom, and the bride has got to know her groom really well. Very excited. Big day comes, and they get back to the honeymoon suite, and then the groom says, "Well, that was lovely. I'm now handing you over to Bob. Bob is the post-wedding person. Bob's going to be looking after you from now. You don't know Bob, but don't worry, he's a great guy and he'll do fine." And that's what it feels like for a customer. They built a relationship with that initial person. But what you can do is bring your whole team into that. And again, you can use video, you can use other ways of exchanging it, so that the salesperson can say, "So happy to have you on board. Really pleased to now introduce you to," and the person standing next to them in a video sent to the customer is the person that's going to do the implementation. Then they can hand them over to the support team. So really, it's bringing every team member into that journey and trying to expose them, even if they are serving an internal customer, so maybe the finance person, is bring them into those. What can we do differently? How can we make your job easier? And yeah, it's just that, and doing it on a quarterly basis, a bit of a like a team builder. Spend half the day out running a workshop. It's really fun.
Put the process on the wall and make sure that everyone's kind of following. Do you know what? In actual fact, you've hit the nail on the head there, Justin. Because as I, remember back in my dark and distant days of working in corporate and particularly in utilities, all of the problems in every project always stemmed on a handover.
Yep, everything falls between the cracks.
Yeah, exactly that. The salesperson's sold something and the delivery person says, "Well, I can't deliver that." They didn't talk, so they've got a gap there. And then the delivery person, is maybe triaged it and put it into projects. And the projects people, we haven't got that kit, and you move all those things. And I think when you look, I think that the key thing today for this episode is if you've got any moments in your customer experience, customer journeys where you just go, "Ugh," that's always a good sign. That "ugh" is always a good sign to go, how did that happen? Why did that happen? What do we need to do to fix that again? And it's probably just maybe a little checklist just to say, "Hey, this is what I'm going to go and sell. Do you lot think you can deliver it?" "Yes." "Well, I'll go and sell this stuff then." And then guess what happens? That handover explains. So I think Bob's got some future in the honeymoon suite. I think if the bride had been explained to her properly with a good checklist at the beginning of the day, I think that would have been all right.
Might be a little bit better anyway.
It might be a little bit better. Talk to me about the customer advocacy cycle. What's this all about? What's this concept?
So if you do that great job of wowing your customers, they're going to be loyal. And as you mentioned, the MSPs have relatively low customer attrition generally. Now, that's not always a good thing, because actually some customer attrition is a positive thing, because you don't necessarily have every customer as a good fit. And actually sometimes taking that bold decision to say, actually, we might not be the right provider for you is sometimes the right thing to do. But ultimately, if you have that customer loyalty, what you really want then is for those customers to be out there selling your services to all of their colleagues and other business associates. Because if you've got customers who are a great fit, it's likely the people they associate with are going to be similar to them in terms of, so let's say a solicitor's, the example we used before, they're going to be in the circles of other solicitors, and they're your ideal candidate in terms of a client. So rather than wasting huge amounts of money on sort of sales and marketing, is actually, why don't you get your customers to do most of your selling for you? and you can have advantages for that client, but actually you don't need to give them kind of money back or free service. Actually, you can just give them a really nice gift, something that's really personalized. If they do refer a customer, surprise them with something, and ideally something that's not branded, otherwise it's not a gift,
Yeah.
and something which actually means something to them.
I think that's brilliant. And then you build those different types of relationships at different levels, then, don't you, within your customer's business?
And interestingly, once a customer actually is an advocate for you, so someone who's referred you to someone else, actually they have a much stronger relationship with you, because people don't do favors for people that they don't like. And actually that really then builds that relationship, very strongly. And those regular business reviews, they're a perfect opportunity to say to your existing clients, is there any other local businesses that you're working with or know of that you think could benefit from our services? Would you mind introducing us? And not everyone's happy having those conversations. And the same like customer feedback, not everyone's happy having that conversation to say, you know, what did we not do this year well that you think, you'd like to see us change? Don't give them the easy out by saying, is there anything you'd like, anything you liked, anything you didn't like? Actually say, what one thing would you like, have liked us to do differently?
Brilliant. I think that's a great and simple question. Sometimes it's the shortest questions, the simplest questions that get you the best results, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I end up doing that for a few clients where it's sometimes it's hard as well. Clients won't, want to have that kind of conversation with someone that they've got a relationship with. They'll say, "Oh no, everything's fine," and then they might disappear or go quiet. So I quite often end up doing that as well, because the nice thing about being an objective third party is people will tell me anything, but asking the right questions is the key.
And I think as well, we talk about, selling the value rather than selling on price and selling the technology. If the world started today and everybody had really great customer service, the experience process mapped out and great account management, there wouldn't be a lot of problems. But what a lot of MSPs do is they look at this thing they've got to do called account management and customer experience moving forwards. But the first thing they do is they look in the rearview mirror and they go, well, if I just go back to Steve and John and start having quarterly business reviews with those guys, they're just going to think I want to sell them some stuff, which is why it's really important that everybody knows that as part of your package, you get a quarterly review like your MOT and all these other bits and pieces, where we get to talk about the latest things that's going on in technology to keep your business safe and secure and etc. And then, as you say, you have those conversations. So when you go back to your existing customers, if you're launching a new way of doing something, be okay with the fact that not every one of them is going to have or want a quarterly business review. As long as you do a 6 monthly security review or something like that, then it's a way of, because you're retraining, you're reclosing them, aren't you, into that same process?
Absolutely, you're reconnecting with those clients in a very different way. And actually, a lot of MSPs are not very good at raising their prices. I know that
Really?
that's an issue. And actually, if you can go back and you can actually explain a price increase by adding additional value, it's a very different conversation. And you can say, we are investing in obviously new technology, maybe cybersecurity solutions. But actually, if you can go back and say, we're actually going to be, working in a very different way with you to better understand your business needs, you can take the conversation away from just a price increase. And actually, it's more about you're adding much more value and doing things differently. And most of those things actually cost nothing, no additional cost to your business. All you're adding is margin.
Yeah, no, exactly that. Exactly that. That's great, Justin. Thanks for that. And I think some really, really great nuggets in there for the guys to take away today. Any final thoughts for yourself on that? What's bubbling up in terms of like a summary?
Well, look at your journey, think about it. What can you strip out that doesn't add value? And are you attracting the customers you really like to work with? And if you've actually, starting to attract ones that aren't a good fit, maybe take that hard decision, because it will cost you more and cause your staff a lot more pain. But the other one is, how do you measure the success of your business? And things like revenue and margins, they're actually lagging indicators. That it's like looking in the rearview mirror of your car. It's actually already happened, because you've done the work to deliver that revenue, but it's all in the past. So instead, try to think about those things which are good indicators of whether your business is healthy going forward. So that customer success, success will look different for every single customer, but take the time to understand what's important for each of your customers. And if you're delivering on it and you're delivering a successful service or solution to them, actually that means you're in really, really good shape for the future as a business, and you won't lose them, and they will buy more from you.
Fantastic. Absolutely ram-packed show. Loving that. Thank you very much, Justin. Final thing for me is just to wish you all the success in your business and what you're up to for the rest of this year. And if people want to continue the conversation with you and learn a little bit more about how they can improve their customer service experience, how do they get in contact with you?
So just Justin Neale on LinkedIn, or go to my website, innovatecx.com. And I'll actually be making available some free templates for doing customer persona creation and the customer journey mapping, which you can use with your teams. And I'll try to get some videos out about how to use those as well.
Brilliant stuff. And if you can give us the links to those, we can pop them in the show notes, and that will help link it all together. So
Absolutely.
Great. Thanks again, Justin. Thanks for your time. And look forward to catching up with you on the next show.
Thanks, Ian. Great conversation.
Cheers. Oh, but one last thing just before you shoot off. And if you're curious about how this episode links with the ability to scale your MSP to $1 million, or if you're already there, accelerate to 5, then we want to invite you to come and take the MSP Mastery Quiz. And in just 3 minutes, you're going to get a 360-degree scan of your business, where you can identify the 1 or 2 tactics that can help you find more time, engage and align your people, and help generate more leads in your MSP. It's really simple. Just click on the link in the show notes. And if you have enjoyed this episode, we'd love to get some feedback from you by means of a rating, review on Spotify or iTunes or your podcast platform of choice. We really appreciate every single one of them. Now you can go and enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to catching up and connecting with you soon. All the best now.